Are we?
You're live.
Okay, welcome everybody. We are now on GrassRoots TV. The whole point of this session today is to talk about HOA insurance. How many of you are in condominium projects? Most of you, I would suspect. We have a townhome project over here. Any single-family home planned communities? Okay, so the insurance crisis that we're facing in Colorado affects all types of HOAs. It's particularly an issue in the condominium context. So what I want to do is, if you could hit the next slide, Cindy, is talk about I'm going to talk for about 15-20 minutes on insurance and HOAs and the legal side of it. I'm an attorney who specializes in HOA law. And this is going to kind of set the stage for the insurance crisis in Colorado and what you as HOAs can do to attempt to manage premiums and get coverage in a market that's challenging. First of all, there's several types of insurance coverages that all HOAs should have. It's typically in your declaration. If you're in a single-family home community with single-family homes on separate lots, it's typically going to be called the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. If you're in a condominium project, the declaration is typically called the condominium declaration of whatever the name of your association is. So when I use the term declaration, that's the document that governs your association. It's a recorded document that addresses a whole bunch of things, including insurance. And your declaration typically will have all the insurance coverages that your association is required to carry. And I just put a list of them up here just so you know, generally speaking. I'm not going to describe everyone because I'll bore you and we won't be able to get to the important parts. The biggest one we're going to be talking about today is property insurance coverage. And that is all associations, regardless of whether you're a planned community, meaning single-family homes or attached townhomes, or a condominium, all HOAs have to insure the common elements of the association on their property insurance coverage policy. And then we're going to talk in a couple minutes about the types of property insurance coverage HOAs have to carry on the units in a condominium project, okay? Then we have liability coverage. In Aspen, you get slips and falls. Somebody slips on ice, trips over a snowbank, they hurt themselves. They say to the association, I'm going to sue you. Your liability insurance coverage policy is going to cover those types of risks. The directors and officers liability coverage, for those of you who are on the board, that protects you if you get sued by a homeowner. The D&O coverage will give the directors a defense. It will appoint an attorney to represent them in the lawsuit. The next one is fidelity coverage. That's theft of funds coverage. And I think there might have been some embezzlement in the news that I won't get into, but fidelity coverage should protect associations from those situations. If you're in a floodplain, flood insurance, workers' comp coverage if you have employees and you're by statute required to carry it. And then there's other types of insurance coverages. But basically, the insurance the association's required to carry as specified in the declaration for your community is typically covered by the common expenses that the homeowners pay, and that's the dues, right? Or more technically, it's called assessments. Go ahead. Okay, so your declaration is going to determine what the association is required to cover. And in planned communities, and those are typically single-family homes, separated homes on lots, what is your declaration is typically always going to say is the association covers the common elements of the project, and the owners carry property insurance coverage on their lots and the dwellings, the structures, the buildings located on those lots. Sometimes for townhomes that are not classified as a condominium project, sometimes in the townhome context, the association will hold the insurance coverage on the exterior components of the buildings and then some part of the unit. Usually it's what we call bare walls coverage, which I'll share with you in a minute. For condominiums, the association always, again, insures the common elements with their property insurance coverage. And also, they have to, under Colorado law, unless you're a pre-Kiowa community, that means your condo was created before July 1st of 1992, you're required to carry a level of property insurance coverage on the owner's units. Okay? And your declaration is going to tell you what level of property insurance coverage condominium projects are required to carry on the units. Go ahead, Cindy. So there's 3 types of property insurance coverage in condo projects. And it's called all-in insurance coverage, original construction insurance coverage, and bare walls insurance coverage. I had, recently I saw a spreadsheet by an insurance agent who doesn't specialize in condominium insurance. And I was talking to my board about this spreadsheet they gave, and it said in the classifications, deluxe insurance, standard insurance, and shell. And I said, condo insurance is not a hamburger. Deluxe insurance doesn't exist. So what we really need to understand is what type of insurance on the condominium units does your declaration require the association to carry? And that's what the board and the insurance broker is required to ensure that you're carrying that level of coverage. Go ahead, Cindy. The first one is all-in and property insurance coverage. I represent several hundred condominium projects, and I probably have 4 that I'm aware of that have all-in insurance coverage. And that's where the association is required to insure everything inside the units except for personal property and window coverings. Not sure why window coverings, but they don't cover it. So basically, everything someone does, everything that's inside the units, including any betterments and improvements made over the years, are covered by the association's insurance coverage. The reason you don't see that much anymore is because it is so prohibitively expensive that, you know, nobody has that anymore. Where I see that typically is in old documents where maybe the project was built in the 60s or the 70s, and that was kind of the thing then, all-in insurance coverage. Okay, next slide, Cindy. The next one is original construction property insurance coverage, and this means that the association covers everything inside the units except for betterments and improvements made by any individual ever in the condominium project. So let's say you had Formica countertops and somebody put in marble or, you know, some other improved type of countertop. That countertop is going to be covered by your associate or your HO6 policy, the policy you carry on your unit, and the association is only going to cover that unit at the point of where it was at when it was originally constructed. And Pat can tell you the magic that insurance companies use to figure that out. Also, this insurance does not cover any of the personal property that anybody has in their units, nor window coverings or anything like that. Okay, go ahead, Cindy. The next one is bare walls property insurance coverage. And this is one I do a lot of declaration amendments to get my clients where the association is only providing bare walls insurance coverage on the condominium units. And that means if you think of your condo unit as a box, okay? So even if you have more than one floor, think of it as a box. Under bare walls insurance coverage, the association insures the unfinished surfaces of the perimeter floor walls and ceilings of that box, load-bearing components of the unit, And they also bring the utilities into the point where they enter the boundaries of the unit. And then Pat always wants me to include in my document amendments for bare walls a tub and a toilet. And she'll talk, I'm sure, more about bathroom stuff when she when she talks about this. But the reason I like bare walls coverage is if you're going from an all-in insurance coverage where you're covering everything, really except personal property in that unit, to bare walls, obviously the insurance the association carries is drastically reduced, and it can drastically, well, it can significantly help you with insurance premiums. But as a lawyer who deals with water-related losses all the time, and what happens in condos, toilets overflow, bathtubs overflow, there's a broken pipe that, you know, floods a unit. It's easier for associations to handle the claims related with bare walls coverage because you know, there's a lot less damage that the association's responsible for insuring. You've got drywall, tape on the perimeter, uppermost ceiling, bottommost subfloor, and perimeter walls of that unit. So it's just easier for boards to handle that and associations to handle it. And the fact of the matter is, depending on what the deductible is on the association's property coverage, you might not have an insurance claim at all. And so one of the things that you like to do, and Pat will probably talk about it, is if you can manage your claims history, that is one of the things that you can do to attempt in a place where we have wildfire risks and that type of thing, to attempt to manage your premiums. Okay, thank you. All right, so when I'm talking about property insurance coverage, I'm also looking at how can I help my clients attempt to help them control skyrocketing insurance premiums. How many of you have had those? Yeah, and if you haven't, you're going to. And I'm just being real with you. You know, we're in an insurance crisis in Colorado, and not only Colorado, but the entire western states and Florida and other places that have natural events that are making carriers pull out of the market. At any rate, deductibles can help you control your premium. I would say 7 or 10 years ago, I used to say you should not have a deductible over $5,000. Now, if you have a deductible that's $5,000 and your premiums are skyrocketing, I'm telling you, increase your deductible, okay? Because higher deductibles have become just a fact of life in this world we're living in with insurance right now. With most of my clients, I am seeing a $25,000 deductible on property insurance coverage. In some cases, I'm seeing a $50,000 deductible on water-related losses with my clients, and that is one way associations can afford the premiums for their insurance. Who pays the costs of the association's premiums? Homeowners do, through assessments, through increases in assessments, special assessments, all of those things. So they're trying to control the costs and to be able to afford the insurance coverage. One of the things that you'll want to look at is look at whether your declaration in the insurance provision, they're in articles, okay? So there'll be an article that just has a bunch of sections on insurance. Look in the article on insurance and see if there's a maximum deductible the declaration says that you can have. And if there is, talk to your lawyer about amending it. Because maximum deductibles of 1% of the value of the policy is not even something you can do in this market, okay? So take a look at that. And then also, just so you know, remember in a condominium context, the policy that the owners carry on their units, we call the HO6 policy. Typically, if a deductible is allocated to you, you can submit it on your HO6 coverage, and hopefully that coverage will pay for it. Okay. Go ahead, Cindy.
Question, please.
Yes.
Some of us might benefit from knowing, does anyone on the Centennial HOA board know which of those three categories of policy our HOA carries?
We're on the third.
Bare walls?
Bare walls,
Yeah, I don't represent Centennial, so I've never seen the declaration. Yeah. Okay, so, you know, the other thing I want you to do when you're looking at the level of insurance coverage your condominium project is required to carry on the units, look at your declaration. And to change the level of insurance that the association is required to carry on the units requires an amendment to the declaration, which generally speaking, depending on what your declaration says, requires a 67% consent of the owners in the community. But it really depends on the amendment provision of your declaration, okay? But so if you have an all-in insurance coverage requirement and you wanted to go to bare walls, you've got to run a formal amendment to the declaration. So when you're looking at doing these things, I recommend that you talk to your lawyer and your insurance broker to discuss whether that would be a beneficial change and how you need to go about that legally to make that happen, okay? The other thing that I recommend that you do is make sure the insurance broker you're using does condo insurance, specializes in it, can quote several lines of coverages, so that you don't get somebody, an insurance company, sending a spreadsheet that says, would you like the deluxe insurance? And, you know, I'm like, my hamburger, do I want mayo or ketchup? You know, so just make sure your broker, because they'll be able to quote many lines of coverage and be able to layer coverages if that's necessary to make sure you're covered. But I'm just going to tell you, just know that premiums are not going down and they're going to go up for a while, okay? All right, I am now going to turn this over to Pat Wilderotter. She's one of those insurance brokers, and she's going to talk about the state of the market and what you as HOAs can do to make yourselves more attractive to the carriers that are still in the market in Colorado.
Ta-da. Everybody's pizza's eaten, done. I don't know, dodging cans or whatever. So, my name is Pat Wilderotter. I'm Executive Vice President and Partner at CCIG. We're an independent-owned insurance agency. I have specialized in insuring community associations for over 25 years. I'm a lot older than Molly. I was president of the Rocky Mountain chapter of CAI. I have a designation CIRM, sounds like a fungus, stands for Community Insurance Risk Management Specialist. There are about 150 of us in the country. I was on the CLAC many, many years ago, which is where I met Molly. One of my claims to fame, and I'm happy to send a copy. You can send this out. I wrote and published it through Wiley Publishing just because I'm very into educating people. And it's really important to know what you need to cover for insurance and to understand things like D&O insurance. Well, I got a cheaper quote, and that's nice, but it doesn't cover what we call non-monetary claims. Non-monetary claims is where the board gets sued for money, but from a non-monetary reason, like discrimination. So, a lot of you, I'm just going to use this example, then we'll get into this, but it's one of my things I like to champion. So, your board members, you have a problem with vandalism, and somebody comes to the board and says, I want to start a neighborhood watch program. And the thing to remember about board members is that most of them are not attorneys or insurance agents, and they're just volunteering to try and do something good for the community. So they go, sounds like a great idea, go for it. So when George Zimmerman shoots and kills Trayvon Martin down in Florida, the board gets sued because the board didn't think to ask, what's your background, don't carry a gun. The D&O policy paid out $1 million. The young man was killed on association property, paid out $1 million, and the umbrella paid out what the level of the umbrella was. I mention this only because it's important to realize if you don't have good insurance, that family could have been knocking on everybody's door in that community going, do you have an extra $400,000? We're here to collect. So making sure you have the right insurance is really important to do. So Cindy, if you can, so in case you didn't know it, insurance is not a nonprofit. So as people are going, why did my insurance go up? It's because in Colorado, and right now in California, in Florida, we're not making a lot of money. In fact, property carriers in 2022 paid out 108% of the premiums they took in on claims. 23 got a little bit better. We paid out 102.6% of the premiums we took in. And then in 2024, we know it's going to be over 100 grand. And so this is why we're seeing one of two things happening. Either companies are leaving Colorado, and companies that are staying in Colorado are saying, we'll stay, but we need to raise our rates, and we need to sometimes scale back what we're willing to do. So if somebody has a $45 million community, we're willing to take 20 million, but we're going to have to layer it for the next 25 million. And so that's what we're seeing, is that the insurance market has changed dramatically. And
Pat,
this is,
does that mean they have to get other carriers to
Yes.
pick up what
Yeah.
the original? Okay.
yeah. So you may have, for example, GenStar will take the first 10 million, Homeland will take the next 20 million. If you're above that, another one. I have a community that has $700 and some million. I have 17 layers on it to cover all of the property. So, and that first layer is always the more expensive because you're probably going to have your claim on that first 10 million layer. But you need to just be creative with that. So, next slide. Thank you, Cindy. What you're concerned about here in Aspen is because you now have a larger wildfire exposure than you used to, because whatever your thoughts are, global warming is real. We are having worse drought situations every year, and up here in the mountains we're having it too. I happen to live on Lookout Mountain, and somebody mentioned before that when they came in about their carrier was dropping them after 40 years. I'm an insurance agent. I live on Lookout Mountain. I had Nationwide for 30 years. Guess what? I put on James Hardy siding at my own expense. I don't have a barbecue grill. I have mitigated the heck out of the trees I love to look at around my yard. And, oh yeah, hail-resistant roof. Never had a claim. I got dropped. So I'm saying you're not alone. We all feel the pain. But one of the things that you need to really look at is what can you do to make your community something that makes it easier for me to sell? Because I sell insurance to you, but I also have to sell to the underwriters. And so, underwriters are now going to do two things. One, they go online. Guess what's posted online? Every unit you're selling. And they look at things like, oh, I noticed the maintenance on the property for this unit they're selling. I noticed where all the trees are. I noticed if they have barbecue grills. And they go, well, we'll cover them if they're 10 feet away. No balconies have 10 feet away from the building. They're going to look at things like, is it frame construction? Have they done updates? Are they sprinklered or are they not sprinklered? One of the reasons you move up to Aspen or any of the mountain communities is because it's great to have all the trees. Guess what? You're going to have the fire department telling you, you need to come in, you need to remove some trees, you need to remove some of the brush around the buildings. And those are things underwriters are going to see. They're also going to come out and inspect. So never lie. on your applications. They're gonna come and see it. So a couple things I say, when you pick an agent, pick one agent, because we all go to the same companies. And so if companies, the ones that are left, tend to get 3 applications in, it goes to the bottom of the pile. They don't have time to deal with that. Boards pick who you want to be your agent. And again, pick somebody that's familiar with doing condominium, townhomes, single-family home communities. I think we just had one single-family. But pick your agent. We can give you a marketing list, but the days of let's go out and get 3 quotes, that's gone. Pick an agent that does things like says, let me see your declarations, because I want to know, like Molly referred to, are we on the deluxe, the special, or the shell, the shell. Those are not insurance terms. Those are Arby's terms, they're not insurance terms. So anyhow, I want to know, what am I covering on the inside? If you have older decks, sometimes the reality is, I can't give you a $5,000 deductible. I mean, I probably could, but the cost of that would be obscene, so I'll refer them to Molly saying, you need to redo your decks, because we don't do 5,000 anymore. And so, pick the agent that you want, let that agent do the marketing for you. That agent should also have driven through the property to see what we're covering. I took on something recently, and I drove through and I go, you have a pool and a pool house. And they go, oh yeah, and I'm going like, it's not covered right now. Here's your current policy. I have highlighted where under liability you will have, okay, here's your number of units, that's great. That's usually where we put, because people fall and drown in pools, you know, or they slip in clubhouses. So that's one of the things you want to make sure they go through and they look at what it is they're insuring. Basic concept, not everybody does. Carriers are now starting to add a wildfire deductible. If you haven't seen it yet, it's probably coming. And that is where how much we can negotiate on that depends on things like how much mitigation work have you done. And that's why I said it's really important, and I know you came here for the trees and that type of thing. They need to be a certain distance from the buildings. You need to go through and clean the brush up, because otherwise you're just giving them firewood. It's why we don't like wood shake shingles anymore, because especially with age, you have a fireplace on top of your roof. You do get lightning. Lightning hits wood shake roofs, they burn. We're going to try and do everything we can, because we can't control the weather. So we're going to do everything we can to lower what the exposures are. There is now going to be a wildfire buy-down program, much like the hail program. And what that means is, so you get your policy in and it goes, you have a 2% wildfire exposure. 2% is going to be 2% of the building.
Is that the deductible?
That's the deductible,
Okay.
Yeah. And so Cincinnati up here now is doing a wildfire buy-down program. But the other thing to look at is, much like hail, can you cover it under your HO6 policy? So under your HO6 policy, you're going to cover your deductible if it's $25,000. So we can assess the deductible. We can't assess if you are the owner. We cannot assess if you do something stupid. Stupid things include things like I was walking out and decided to flush my baby's diaper down the toilet and I left. Water goes down. What did somebody tell me one time? They wanted to steam their shower because they were going to be gone for a couple of weeks and they forgot to turn it off. And about 3 days later, there is fog on when I look up at the building, I'm seeing fog on the windows. Yeah, so and at that point it's, your hardwood floors are ruined, everything's great. One of my favorites is somebody that wanted to have crisp French fries. These are all true stories. And if any of you are old enough to remember Crisco, so she put the pan on the stove with the Crisco and turned it on so it could melt and be hot. By the time she got back from the store getting the French fries, she came back to the fire department. All true stories. So I'll be quiet now.
So Pat, on the wildfire
Yeah.
buy-down program,
Yeah.
so let's say they have a 2% deductible.
Right.
And that's, I'm assuming, based on the value of the
Building, right.
Okay, so what does the buy-down do? Can they pay to reduce it to maybe a 1%?
Yeah, they buy a separate policy that will lower it
Okay.
down. So, and again, part of negotiating those deductibles is what have you done around the property to try and avoid fires? And everybody gets like there's 100, and once you're up to 80 out of 100, then you probably are going to get a wildfire deductible. If you're below that, we can probably negotiate that. Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about wood-burning fireplaces and stoves in older
Yes.
construction, with wood construction condos?
Yeah. Hopefully you do things like you put the chain fire thing over it. What I would advise boards, because it's a big whoop whoop.
Yeah.
That
I
great-
just want to say, I've
Yeah.
had to, with 2 clients now, the insurance carrier to not be dropped or their premiums to skyrocket, we've had to actually amend the declaration to prohibit the use of fireplaces, wood-burning fireplaces. They could convert them to electric, but in order to be insurable,
Yeah.
or to not have to have a
Yeah.
$2 million special assessment literally, to cover the premiums, they had to amend the debt.
Yeah.
Can they convert to gas or just?
Yeah, they can convert
Yes.
to gas.
Yeah.
The other thing I recommend, if it comes down to it too, is it may not be the responsibility of the association to get a chimney sweep out each year. However, I will say to an association, pay for that because your insurance cost is going to be less than what you're paying for the chimney sweep.
Yeah.
So,
Pat, what other things can associations do to make themselves more attractive to insurance carriers?
no deferred maintenance. That's the big thing. Deferred maintenance costs more, and so that's a huge, huge issue. If you all heard about the Champlain Towers that went down in Sunrise, Florida, 5 years, they knew, they had an engineering study done for 5 years. Every year, people decided that, no, we are not going to special assess everybody. They had gotten the loan to fix all of these problems 2 weeks before one of the towers went down. That's deferred maintenance. So now we're starting to see for older communities that as part of the underwriting, they're saying, we want to see that an engineer has gone through and an engineer feels that this is a safe structure. And one of the things I think eventually you'll see legislative-wise, and I know Florida's pushed it since that, is that you have people saying, no, we don't want to do this. I think eventually they're going to give the boards the right to special assess everybody because they had tried there for 5 years and close to 100 people died. So, yeah, yes, sir.
Pat, so it would appear that the rising cost of insurance in Colorado, HOAs,
Yeah,
is driven by losses due to wildfires.
no,
No?
a lot of this, I'm just saying overall, you have wildfires, you've had, not just wildfires, but you had, one of the things we learned with the fire in Superior, it's not just the mountains. Everybody thought Superior's great, never going to be a problem. If you build over mine shafts that were there for years where it can travel underground, chances are fires can come. No, primarily this has been hail, but what I am saying is we're going to start seeing the wildfire become more of an issue.
Okay, so to reduce our premiums,
Yeah.
how does exactly the buy down wildfire buy down? How does that work?
You would buy a separate policy for it.
And what does that policy do, Pat?
What that policy will do is, like you said, if you had a 2% wildfire, you could do a buy-down policy that would give you a 1% policy.
So-
1%.
Could
So
you
it's
give us
gonna
an
be more
example of
cost.
how that actually works?
Yeah, it's just like it's like the hail buy-down.
So
Well,
does-
we don't have buy down,
So does
so how does
that
that
mean,
work?
Pat, if there's a
Yeah.
fire and we have a 2%, you would submit a claim on the buy-down policy?
If you have, yes,
To cover the 1%?
percent. So you could cover part of it through, you're buying an additional insurance policy to lower what the deductible is on your basic policy. Does that make sense? So if you have a 2%, you can buy another policy that will lower it down to, let's say, a 1%, but it's gonna cost you money.
Say it's $1 million is your property, and so it'd be.
Yeah, so let's say the fire goes through and you have $4 million worth of damage. You're gonna assess every homeowner for that first million. You're gonna then go to the buy-down policy for the next million. And then the rest of it hopefully was covered somehow with the insurance policy, because all they gave you was a 2%, so anything over the 2% they're gonna pay for.
And so guys, she's referring to a 2% deductible.
Yeah, that's just
on
the
policy.
deductible.
Well, okay, so basically you just ask your agent to
To go to another carrier to get a buy-down if you have a wildfire deductible. Now, if you do a lot of the stuff the insurance company wants in terms of mitigation, you may not even have a deductible, or you may have like a $100,000 deductible. So part of what the underwriter and the insurance companies are going to decide is what is the possibility that they are going to be caught in a wildfire area. So how far are they from the fire station? What has the community done to try and mitigate if a fire starts? I know of one community where they literally went out and got old storage tanks and put them in the ground and bought an old pump truck so that if a fire started, they could be there spraying down the buildings. So I'm saying, have any of you seen wildfire deductibles yet? No? It hasn't hit yet. I'm just saying, be prepared that it could be coming.
how do we get prepared that it's coming?
You mitigate. We're gonna let the fire lady come up in a minute and talk. So that's the best thing you can do. And I think you can do things like, you may decide to no longer allow wood-burning fireplaces. You can change them to gas, but that's an issue. You don't stack firewood next to the frame building. I mean, things that seem pretty simple, but, you know, I drive through a community and we've got firewood stacked next to a frame building that was built in the late 70s. And that wood is brittle. And so it's like, you probably need to move the firewood if you're allowed to have wood-burning fireplaces. But then the association, consider cleaning the chimneys. The other thing a lot of you will deal with is seasonal rentals. Insurance companies look at that. And how many of your units get rented out? And is it just for a weekend? And you can go onto YouTube and see what a lot of people are doing in terms of these weekend parties. You may decide our community is going to exclude fireworks. A lot of communities have already done that, so.
And just so you know, I have had a lot of my clients have their insurance company require that the board adopt and enforce rules prohibiting propane gas grills on balconies, requiring that anything like that be at least 10 feet away from the foundation of the building. So I think we're gonna see more and more requirements from insurance carriers saying, boards have got to adopt these rules. And it's gonna be stuff that people like to do. You like to grill in the summer,
Yeah.
right? But if you wanna be insured, based on my experience, we're getting there where we're gonna have a lot, and it goes, same thing with the wood burning fireplaces, things like that you're
Yeah.
gonna see.
How much forewarning do insurance companies give you for mitigation like that? Because we still have barbecue gas grills, we do tons of wildfire mitigation every year because we're in an area.
It depends on the insurance company, and you let them know, this is what we're doing, this is our plan. You know, I had one high-rise that, they needed them to get rid of their grills.
So they'll
And
tell
those
you in
balconies were
advance?
less than that, they gave them a year.
Okay,
And there were some people that just, we're not getting rid of our grills, we want the right to, you know, to smoke our meats, whatever.
they can pay the premium.
And so then I put them with an excess lines carrier, and they go, we didn't know it was gonna go up this much. Well, get rid of your grills. And sometimes it can come down to literally the board having to, I have seen a couple occasions where they have had to take a unit owner to court because they have refused to do whatever.
Or you can, I know in our declaration, we can charge owners for insurance premiums that, you know, are above and beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
And they come and check, guys.
I'm saying,
I'm seeing my clients say, we know they're coming in a wheat mowing, I have these 3 owners who have not removed their grill, what do I do? So they are coming in, you know, to ensure that those requirements are being enforced.
and taking the grill inside your unit while they show up is not an option. Can we just take them and put them in, literally, somebody said that to me, and I'm going like, no. I think that's my last slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Now we're gonna,
Yeah.
would like to introduce Allie Hammond. She's with the Aspen Fire Protection District and the soon-to-be chief, I think. Anyhow, did I let a cat out of a bag that I wasn't supposed to? Anyhow, they're gonna talk about what you can do in terms of fire mitigation in your communities to help you manage the risk and premiums.
Before leaving the previous subject, the insurance companies are they're spending 108% of what they take in. They want to change the business, they want to get out. Does the insurance agency predict what's happening next year and over the next 5 years? Are our policies going up 13% or 98%?
not going up 90, I haven't had anything go up 98%. I think what you're seeing insurance companies doing is that and realize this is property insurance, so if they're doing well on liability, if they're doing well on other areas, that it all evens out somewhat. I am saying expect 15%, but it just, in the last year, what you saw with some people just getting out of the market and all that was sort of like a gut reaction. And I think as they are charging more and putting more money in reserves, because the bottom line is, and always deal with A-rated insurance companies, you deal with a C-rated insurance company, they may not be around to pay the claim. So I think you're seeing that the insurance companies the last 2 years have been really stockpiling reserves.
And just FYI,
Yeah.
and something we haven't talked about is many insurance carriers have pulled out of the market.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we're reducing the carriers who are willing to insure.
Yeah, and the other thing, it's just a reality, you used to see rates and their reserves were tied to the stock market. I don't even want to discuss the last 2 months, but it was not paying out what it had, I mean, at one point, people were making 15% on the stock market, they've got billions sitting there, their reserves are great, they get some claims, doesn't matter, when the stock market starts paying 5 or 6%. Then in investments, when you see investments going down, that's when you see the insurance companies raising rates going, we need to stockpile because when stuff hits, we need to be able to pay it. So just look at California, just incredible. Yes, sir.
Question, and I don't know if you're gonna get to this later, but STRs versus LTRs, your crystal ball going forward, you know. Oh,
Short-term
I'm sorry,
rentals.
short-term rental.
Short-term
versus
rentals.
Short-term
which is-
Which we can't do, so
Yeah.
deed restricted
Yeah.
owners
Short-term
can't do it.
rentals
Yeah.
versus long-term rentals.
Yeah, like,
If you're gonna rent it to a long-term rental, if you're doing, and the questions we fill out on applications, do they have short-term rentals? Do they have any under 6 months? Do they have any under a week?
Do you see a
Don't
trend
lie.
though?
Oh, yeah, because have you ever rented a car? Did you take as good care of it as you take care of your own car at home?
So
Yeah,
but
wondering if
our
there's
rate's going up because of it.
Yeah, I
Oh, yeah.
mean, we just dealt with
Or
this.
some people will decline to write it. If there are a lot of, they just go on YouTube and watch everybody having the parties with 200 people showing up to a house they rented for, the weekend. So, yeah, I think that's a real thing you need to consider because people seem to take, I like to say they're not playing nice in the sandbox anymore. And suddenly it's like, well, if we rent this, we can invite 200 people and we can get kegs and it's gonna be great. And we don't care, we gave them a $100 deposit, they'll take care of it, we don't care. And we're off to the races, and then the insurance companies get these, oh, I'm sorry, they just burned down a, $400,000 section of the house. So, yeah, that's a question we're being asked. And so as a homeowner, that's something you should consider. Yes, ma'am?
Do insurance companies follow local fire mitigation requirements and so forth, or?
They look at that, but the insurance company is God.
And they set their
So
own?
I had people say to me, oh, well, we can have gas grills because according to the fire department, as long as we use the campfire grills, I'm sorry, nobody uses 1-pound grills. They all have 25-pound grills. I don't care. But I just sit there and go, I don't care. What I care about is what the insurance company says you need to do. It doesn't matter what your municipality says. And the municipality will now talk.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me. I am Allie Hammond, the Director of Community Wildfire Resilience for Aspen Fire. So wildfire resilience being everything that happens before there's an actual emergency, everything we can do on the preparation side to make sure that we reduce those destructive consequences. And with me is Jake Anderson. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm the Deputy Chief of Operations, so I kind of handle the other side of things, when we have an incident and how we respond to that. And so Allie's going to basically walk you through some of the things that you can do as an HOA or as multifamily, especially type properties. But what I would ask you is while we're giving you this presentation, think about how you can help us. If you're in this room and you haven't heard from us, it's because we can't get a hold of you. And we've really tried to reach out to HOAs and find contacts so that we can start working on some of this stuff. And we've been pretty unsuccessful. So that's one of the reasons that we're happy to be here.
Getting better.
Is to have that discussion with you. And we're even trying to figure out, we'll talk about wildfire assessments. And one of the things that we're doing with that, that's where we go out to a home, we'll take a look at it, we'll say, here's what the FireWise standard says, and here's some things you could do to make your property more defensible. And like I said, we'll get all into that later. One of the areas we kind of struggle with it is especially with an HOA or with a multi-use complex, where we can't, what we don't want our wildfire assessments to do is become weaponized in any way. So we don't want a neighbor calling on their neighbor saying go assess their house. We also don't want to necessarily have an HOA weaponize that against a member or members. In some way, right? So if you guys can just kind of think about, look through that lens and try to figure out a way to help us to do those in a way that would work for a group like you. So, go ahead.
Right. So I get really excited about community wildfire resilience because this is one of those spaces that in today's day and age, it's something that can actually bring people together. Of course, it can be very weaponized, and we unfortunately do see that about go check out their property, they're bad, and we invite everyone to say, to turn that around and look at yourself and your own actions and see what is it that I can bring to the table, and what is it that I can invite my neighbors with an open hand instead of a pointy finger. So with that, yeah, perfect. Our first side, community resilience means living with fire and proactively reducing its destructive consequences. So I don't think I need to make a case to anyone in this room that wildfires are a big deal that we should do something about. So I do want to ask and make sure we're all on the same page though, how do wildfires spread? Is it if your home is being threatened by a wildfire, what is the threat? Is it the active flame front moving through your neighborhood? Is it like a lightning strike that's gonna make your house explode? Which, that doesn't really happen. Embers, yes, who said embers? Amazing, and how do embers spread? Wind. Okay, so if there was a wildfire like right outside the window, but there is no wind, the chances that the fire department is gonna be able to put it out is super high. That's like a great scenario. When things start to get windy, that's when we really start to worry. So we're not trying to prepare for just like your average everyday, like, yeah, there's someone threw their cigarette and now the corner of the park is on fire. We're trying to prepare for the windiest, super scary conditions. And with that, we want to prepare for ember spread. So when we think about flying embers, try to imagine wherever you live, like if someone were shooting a confetti cannon, where would the confetti get stuck to? And embers can be like little fireflies, like tiny, but they can also be like a flying pine cone. Where would that flying pine cone, or in my brain, the confetti, where does that get stuck? Are there like little holes in your wood siding? Do you have vents that don't have mesh screening? Like, so that's a really good place to start. If you have a wood roof, that's totally a place that a piece of confetti could easily get stuck. So when we talk about preparedness, we want to make sure that you do know it makes a huge difference. We're going to show some pictures later that should illustrate that. Other keywords, we're going to talk about home hardening. So that's your structure itself. What does your structure look like in terms of roof type, siding? Are your gutters clean? Are your vents covered? That sort of thing. And then we're going to talk about defensible space and the home ignition zones. So those are kind of interchangeable terms. You might hear either of them used. Functionally, they're the same things, but it's like if you are drawing perimeters around your home, those are those home ignition zones. So we have a zone that's like 0 to 5 feet from your home, 5 to 30 feet from your home, and then 30 feet to 100 feet. And in each zone, we want to address our fuels a little bit differently. And so the last key term on there being the fire-free 5. I can totally level with honestly everyone. I just moved into a log cabin in the forest, and so I am also doing my wildfire mitigation right now, and it can get really overwhelming. And this idea of wildfires and mitigation is just like, oh my gosh, this is going to cost so much money, and there's so much to do. Start with the first 5 feet around your home. Don't let it overwhelm you to the point where you can't take action. Look at your structure and the first 5 feet around your home. If you have listened to nothing else today, and you're not going to listen to anything else I say, remember the first 5 feet are the absolute most critical, most important for doing your mitigation. Next slide, thank you. So as these wildfire crises are getting worse, and there's a lot of reasons why things are trending worse over time, we've actually been able to study more and more of the science of how homes burn down. So this is a study done by the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety, IBHS. They've got great YouTube videos if you want to nerd out on this. But they basically have this lab where they shoot flying embers at model homes, and they see what ignites and what doesn't. So this is a very, very clear demonstration. We have half of the house that is built with non-combustible materials and is surrounded in its first 5 feet by non-combustible materials. The other side of the house has wood siding and mulch leading up to that wood siding. And when you shoot flying embers, guess which side ends up catching on fire? So we are at a point where we know that these are effective mitigation techniques. Next slide, please. I don't know if this is actually going to play in a PDF form, but this is one of those YouTube videos where, again, we have some firefighters who are just putting the tiniest bit of fire on the ground around 2 different types of home construction. One of them is ignition-resistant building materials with a metal fence, and the vegetation is at least 5 feet away. and the other side we have a wooden fence, a juniper right next to that fence, wooden mulch all on the ground, and you can imagine that once wind starts blowing, that fire catches that juniper, which leads to the fence, which catches the home on fire. So we have these different pathways that those embers can follow. You may hear us use the term ladder fuels. What could fire climb up like a ladder to get to your home? So we can kind of skip past this one. Wildfire resistance, we want you to make the right choices. So it's on the right-hand side. Don't do the ones in the red. Those are the bad choices. So think about, are your eaves closed? Somewhere that an ember can get stuck. Siding, is it ignition resistant? Windows, do you have dual pane tempered windows? Because that single pane, if it gets really exposed to heat, it'll shatter and it'll let those embers right into your home. Is your mulch wooden? Or is that something you could replace with, rocks or gravel in that first 5 feet? Or make like a nice stone patio or something. And then your deck as well, you may have a deck that even has holes underneath it, and that's where all of your like fall leaves kind of just get like brushed under. That's a great place for an ember to find its way. And embers are very, very sneaky, so we have to think, like, if I was gonna try and be a sneaky ember, where could I get to? Next slide, please. So back to that idea of defensible space. So this image comes from Firewise USA. That's what we base all of our education and information on. Firewise USA best practices. So, and I really do, I like home ignition zones because that kind of gives me a picture in my head, but defensible space means something a little bit different to me. Defensible space means that you have done enough clearing around your home that if a firefighter during an incident walked up to your home, they could say, I have enough space to safely defend this home. If you have trees that are right up against your building, firefighters are gonna see that and say like, hey, I don't think that I can safely be effective here. This is a triage situation. I'm gonna move to the next home because the next home over did their mitigation work and I have enough space to be safe. They're not gonna stick their neck out and risk their lives for, candidly, for homeowners that haven't put in the time and effort to create that safe space around their home. So defensible space really gives me that idea of reciprocity of what we can do to allow our fire personnel to operate safely and effectively when defending our homes. Next slide, please. Anyone recognize this picture?
Yes.
Lahaina. So this is what they called the Miracle House in Lahaina. In such a horribly terrifying, devastating fire, there are reasons why this house did not burn down. And they, if you read up on this house, they did the mitigation. They did ignition resistant wood siding, they had a metal roof, and this is one of those, the proof is in the pudding. Next slide, please. Do you want to talk about this one? He was on this fire, so.
Yeah, so this is Mesa Verde National Park. That's a place where probably a lot of you have been or visited. I think we burned about half the park over the couple of years that I worked there. It was just a very active couple of fire seasons. And what you're looking at in this photo is the result of about 2 decades of fuels management, which was immediately adjacent to the structures that were there. Allie brought up the point, as the ops chief, it's my job, right, to keep you safe. It's also my job to keep our firefighters safe. And I will not risk their lives to save property, right? Especially, there's a little risk in everything we do, right? But we're not going to take extreme risks to put people in a situation where the likelihood of them coming out of that alive is not high, right? We were able to, where you see that, I guess, third circle on the right there is where we started. And as the flame front of 100 to 200 foot flames moved through this fuel type, marching right up to us, it got to the point where we had done 20-foot crown spacing within those trees. It dropped to the ground, we hit it with water, we moved to the next spot. right? So out of almost 100 structures, we lost 2. Because we were able to safely stay there and fight the fire, right? And what I really want to point out to this group, and this is, we've all talked about the trees that we love, right? And why we live in this beautiful natural landscape. Look at the only trees that survived this. The only trees that survived this fire were the ones in the managed areas, right? That had been cleared and managed over a multi-decade period. And these are some of the things that we're doing on the fire department side, but we really do need your help, right? Because it doesn't matter how much mitigation we can do, right? We're trying to stop that advancing flame front, but what did Ally just tell you is the major issue for us? Little tiny embers, right? Fire moves in 3 dimensions, right? It's not just on 2 axes this way, right? It's going to be up in the air and moving, and the only way for us to actually be effective against that is for you to have done some preparation ahead of time. And she's not wrong. We look at that house with shake shingle roof and trees right up next to it, and we move on, right? We have limited resources, and especially in these types of situations, we move right past that. So if that's something that's speaking to you, come talk to us about some ways that you can make that better. Because there are situations like this where we can be very, very effective. But I would tell you, there are areas, even in our immediate area around town, where we won't be, and we know that.
And to add on to Jake's point about the trees and the trees that survived, I think a lot of people think about mitigation as this like, well, the fire department's asking me to clear cut, everything in town, and that's just terrible. I love my trees. And, there's definitely a degree of like, yeah, we can do some mitigation. There are some things that we could probably cut down to make town safer. But at the same time, there are a lot of these techniques that we're talking about, like home ignition zones. The closer you are to a structure, that's where you want to do your most impactful mitigation. So if you have a tree that's like touching your home, yeah, we would want to do some mitigation. Sometimes that looks like limbing that tree up. Other times, maybe it would call for removal depending on the circumstances. But as you get further and further away from those structures or whatever values at risk that you have that flexibility to start having more and more trees in those areas as you move kind of further away on your property.
And question for you guys too, are all trees equal?
No. That's coming up later.
Okay.
No spoilers.
Okay.
Oh, not all fuels are created equally. How many people, did anyone see any of the Sunnyside fire, the prescribed fire? So I hope you knew about it ahead of time and it didn't scare you. At least not too bad.
Anyone in the room?
It's okay if it was frightening. I mean, it's pretty intimidating. That's totally fair.
That plume of smoke 2 weeks later was kind of attention to get.
And do you know why we weren't as concerned with that?
It was inside the boundary.
Correct. Right. It's inside, and it's not just inside right next to the line. It was inside hundreds of feet of black, already burned vegetation. Right. And that's actually one of the ways we fight fires. Right. When we have that big 200-foot flaming front, you think we're effective against that with engines? We light our own fire and let that draw it into it, and that's how we can actually be effective against those bigger flame lengths. But yeah, and what I would say is that's a great example, right? When you look at that, you'll see up there on the hillside, it burned here, but not here, it burned here, but not here, right? Everything that had snow on it or was on a slightly north-facing slope didn't have any fire in it, right? And so it did exactly the type of mosaic that we're talking about. None of us want to cut down all the trees, right? Like that is not the point.
Yeah, we just want to reduce fuels,
right,
not eliminate entirely.
And eliminating fire from, the area, the landscape around us for the past 100 years is part of the problem, right? And that's why we're trying to reintroduce it where we can and mimic it through mechanical means where we can't, right? It's not safe for us to go light a prescribed fire right there, right? So we need to thin out that brush with different techniques.
Yeah, and I would add to that, the cool thing about prescribed fire is that we are able to choose the exact conditions that we light under, and we, our federal partners have this whole checklist, and they go down the list and say, is the wind the right direction? Is the humidity the right direction? Is the vegetation the right, have the right water content? And so that's what that looked like under all the right conditions that we like. Can you imagine what that would have looked like if it was August and we did not get to pick the conditions? So anyways, that's not the point of this slide. The point of this slide is that not all fuels are created equally. On the left-hand side of the slide, you will see a lot of overgrown, kind of dead, decadent oak brush. Other things that I would say are in the a similar category would be things like juniper. If you watched that Sunnyside burn and you saw all of a sudden there were just big flames, you're like, flames! I shouldn't be able to see flames, it's scary. That was more than likely juniper up on the hill that was torching. So if you have juniper next to your home, keep that image in mind as to why we mitigate juniper. That's a very high priority. Oak brush also has a much higher oil content in its leaves. And so when oak brush burns, it definitely tends to burn hotter and more intensely. The majority of what we saw on the Sunnyside burn was low intensity fire, and that's what we're going for. But this is why we try and keep those high intensity fuels out of the area. Meanwhile, aspen trees on the right-hand side hold much more water. So if those are kind of in your community, they are much less of a concern. So this is, a great slide kind of demonstrating if you don't know what's a big concern and what should be a big concern, we offer free home inspections. Basically, they're no obligation. We're not going to yell at you and get you in trouble and cite you. We're just going to be like, yeah, that could be a concern. You should consider removal. Yes?
If you decide that a tree needs to be removed for fire mitigation, does that make it exempt from the tree rules about the fine you pay for taking a tree over a certain diameter and that
So
sort of thing?
we're working on that conversation with the city.
Okay.
We're at a point right now where we do get to inform city foresters with yes, we see this as a hazard, or no, we don't. And then kind of the next step for us in that conversation is trying to talk through mitigation fees and trying to reduce barriers for our community to make that right choice. But I will also say, we definitely get calls where people are like, hey, I want to remove my tree. Can we say it's fire mitigation? And that tree is 150 feet away from your home. It's not around anything. And we're like, yeah, no, that doesn't count. So, it is very much needs to be a true hazard in order for that kind of conversation to move forward.
I think when our project was built 30 years ago, it was designed around a handful of gigantic leaf trees that were there before the project was built. We had to position the buildings. So these giant spruces, one great big maple tree, they're still there, but they're enormous. And I don't know if they're just, a fuse in the front yard or what.
Well, and, I would encourage, it's tough, right? Because we want to communicate to you the potential hazards that are out there. But just because there's a tree too doesn't necessarily mean it's available to burn, right? So if that tree is well irrigated, and if it's the correct species, et cetera, these are the things we're trying to work through with the city. And I would say they're being really proactive, and they're even talking about, they do have canopy goals, for the urban canopy that they're trying to maintain, which, again, it's one of the reasons we live here, right? It's this beautiful place. But they're even talking about trying to transition that canopy to more fire resistive over the next couple decades, but again, even that coniferous tree, that pine tree or, spruce or whatever that is more susceptible to fire, if it's healthy and well irrigated and not in a dormant state, in those different times of year, it's hard to get those things to burn. I think that's kind of where we kind of struggle too, right? Because we want people to understand the hazard exists, but it's hard to communicate, I guess, some of the nuance along with it.
Would you hit the next slide for us? Thank you. So back to that idea of fuels reduction, not clear cutting. That image on the left, okay, I'm sure y'all have been camping before. If I wanted to build a campfire, I would start by getting a bunch of little sticks and putting that kind of more towards the base, and then, adding more and more fuel as that fire grows. And that picture on the left, that's got all of the little sticks right on the bottom, and then more and more fuel for that fire to take over. The picture on the right, if I'm trying to light a fire in green grass, and then there's nothing for it to climb up to catch that big, big stump, I'm gonna have a really hard time building that campfire. So just to give you the mental image of doing some of the fuels reduction that clears out the down below, that underbrush, and then even limbing up those trees, that can go such a long way too. So we're not like remove everything, but you know, have an idea of what is gonna do the most, you know, the best return on investment for the mitigation that you do choose to do. Yes?
How far up do you limb spruce, blue spruce?
How far do you limb up a blue spruce? So it depends on a bunch of things. I would say that you should ask us to come out and do to do a wildfire mitigation assessment, and we can help inform those sort of decisions. Like, I know that fire-wise, sometimes people will say blanket statement, like, it needs to be limbed up 6 feet. I'm 5 feet. Like, if your blue spruce is 6 feet tall, it probably doesn't make sense. So it's situational, and I would encourage you to, you know, invite us and or the city forester or another professional to help you make that.
How do they do that? Well, how do they contact you?
So
Do you have it on a slide?
I do. It's on the end slide, and then I also, if you're like looking generally for more information, aspenfire.com/wildfire. That's kind of the the easy page to go to start the ball rolling. Yes.
We usually do our wildfire mitigation every year, but when's the best time? Because right now it's, you know.
It's always time. It's always time for, but yes, to your point, we find that doing mitigation in the spring is really, really effective because, you know, things like continue to grow a ton over the course of the season.
Right, not like bare limbs, so there should be some vegetation on the trees.
Right, it's hard for us to do an assessment if we can't see, you know, any vegetation on it.
It's easier for you to remove it.
Right.
If there's no-
Brush it before it leaves out, it's much heavier and,
Yep.
you know, so it's, yeah.
Exactly. Great, next slide, Cindy, if you don't mind. Thank you. So here is another example that might be a little bit closer to home for those of us in this community. The Lake Christine fire in 2018. There's a pretty clear line that you can see in that image. And on one side of the of that line is the you know, there's a community, and on the other side there is a lot of burn. The only reason that community was saved is because they had done mitigation like along that line prior to the fire. I mean, do you want to elaborate on that one at all?
Sure, yeah, that was, if you guys were around, that was a pretty hectic night. And part of the reason that line is so defined is because that is where we lit our own fire, right, to defend that community. I will say, even as we started it, there was a pretty low level of confidence that it was going to be successful. That was much more successful than I think even we thought it was going to be. We were giving it a shot, but it was because the fuels immediately adjacent to, there's a fence line right there, had already been reduced in the, I think, 5 years prior, that gave us that ability to even be in there. And even after the fact, right, since we were in there, we went around to houses and found porches on fire and chainsawed them off of the house. We ripped siding off that was on fire. We were able to actually work in that space to save that community. So yeah, I mean, the stuff that happens ahead of time, that was crucial in even allowing us to be there.
We always say the best time to prepare for an emergency is before it's an actual emergency. Next slide, please. Yes, question.
As far as firewood piles, how far away from the house do they have to be?
Definitely not against the house. In the winter, you know, it's maybe okay if it's a little bit closer in. During the summer, I'd say around like 30 feet is ideal. But if you can do even farther, it's not gonna hurt.
You know, and that's from the wildfire perspective, right? The potential, if you don't have a spark arrestor on your chimney, right, of that falling down your roof and right onto that pile next to your house, even in the wintertime, that could be a real issue too. You know, and so it's, but to Allie's point, what that is in the summertime is a massive jackpot of fuel, right? That's ready to burn, and it's gonna have a long burn time. It's gonna put out a lot of radiant heat over a protracted period. Right, so it's not just this, even something that's moving through temporarily. It's going to be sitting there you know, we've had people stack their wood around their propane tanks, right? And that's a
He's
pretty.
saying don't do that,
Yeah.
just to clarify.
You know, and fortunately, right, those have been designed well, they vent. But I will say, even when you're on those fires, right, like that's a pretty disconcerting sound, as you're just hearing that escalating higher and higher and higher as it's spouting off flaming gas. And, you know, once those things are on fire, it's tough for us to manage that, so.
We have a question in the back, yes?
Yeah, this might be slightly off topic, but given the fact that we're talking about wildfire, and we are surrounded by so much national forest and BLM land, is it possible for this year, when we're facing such a huge drought, lack of resources, have you all been proactive in going after banning campfires and fireworks completely for this summer?
So that's, I'm glad you're bringing this up. So we are doing a lot at the landscape scale and the homeowner scale to reduce community risk. But again, these fires only get out of control under the right conditions. So, you know, if there's snow on the ground, if you want to have a campfire, you know, there should be no fire restrictions. Again, these are under the specific conditions. So as we get further and further into the summer, as things, you know, either develop in terms of drought or develop in terms of a very green season, that's when those decisions are made, because, you know, the reason why we love to be here is to be outside and recreate. We don't want to eliminate that entirely as, you know, an opportunity for the community. But if we think that it's a red flag day, if it's windy and hot and dry, then we absolutely are going to restrict people's ability to do any type of outdoor fire.
So, and just to add a little more education to that, we do use an evidence-based process to make those decisions, and it is the Forest Service and their field specialists that lead that conversation. And it does depend on the energy release components, burning indices, things like that. Historically, it's been based off of, you know, past, right, and where we're at, and, you know, I guess percentiles of potential for high fire behavior. We've actually moved into this year using AI modeling, which we used for part of last year. And so there is a predictive component to it, and I would anticipate potentially more restrictions this year because of that. Because it's not just going to say, here's where we are today, it's going to say, here's where we're going to be in 5 days, given the predicted weather and the current conditions, which is something we haven't been able to do previously.
I'm a volunteer with the Forest Service. One of the problems that we see out on the trails and in the areas is that people have headed out into the backcountry or into campsites when there is no fire ban. But by the time they get there, there is a fire ban, but the knowledge and the education is not to them at that point. So my question and my concern is, at what point can we be more proactive so we don't have to be so reactive when we have so many indicators that are pointing to fire danger, fire risk, etc.?
It's a really good question. You know, and I think to your point, you know, I think the resources this year are going to be limited in different ways than they have been historically. You know, and so that is a conversation we're directly engaged in with the Forest Service, and how we can help, right? It's, as you know, a lot of the fires that have happened, or abandoned campfires that are still burning, et cetera, have been put out historically by volunteers or by Forest Service employees, and that may not be as reliable as it has been in the past. You know, and so we're even talking about getting up to Lincoln Creek and doing some stuff ahead, you know, preseason. But yeah, I anticipate that conversation to be ongoing.
Is there a way to do anything with signage or banners over Main Street? Just fire awareness or something like that, just so that there's more education as tourists come in and people visit from different parts of the country that don't have the same issue, or assume that. I'm just throwing these out there. Why you guys are right here?
Yeah. So, you know, kind of going back to that idea of what my division does in terms of community wildfire resilience, we're trying to do like the proactive education as well as assessments and get in front of tourists. as well as coordinate at the landscape scale. At this point, we have pretty limited personnel on our team too, because we're only like, our Aspen Wildfire Foundation is only a year old. We're trying to grow what we're doing as quickly as possible, but these things do take time and resources. So I would love to see a Main Street banner like all throughout the summer. At this point, that funding is not necessarily there. We want to continue to like try and put brochures into every hotel, and the brochures, that potentially takes us away from being able to do an assessment with someone. So we're balancing a lot of priorities right now, but we are trying to move in exactly the direction you're talking about. And it's hard to have 15 top priorities, but they are all top priorities. So I'm gonna shoot through the last couple slides because I know people have limited time here. So I do want to give you an idea of, at that homeowner scale and at the landscape scale, what we're doing, what we're offering. So in terms of homeowner mitigation resources, we provide free risk assessments. You can sign up online to be added to that list. Wildfire risk mapping, if you want to learn about your area's risk, go on our website. You can learn a little bit more about your area's risk compared to other areas. Some areas are south facing and they get more sun exposure, they dry out faster. That's the kind of information that you can learn a little bit more about by going online. We have a community chipping program. Has anyone heard about this yet? 3 people, sweet, okay. Outreach and education. So we are now, we've been running this program for, this is I think maybe our 3rd or 4th year, and it has been this really small program in terms of like brush collection and helping homeowners reduce fuels around their homes and properties. This year we're going district-wide, we're going big. And so basically, if you go onto our website, if you sign up, you have to register in advance, we're not mind readers. If you sign up and you bring your brush to the curb and follow the guidelines, we will come and pick it up and haul it away for free. So there's specific times that we do this. Again, check the website, make sure that you're, following the guidelines and within the timelines, but we want to make it as easy as possible for people to reduce the fuels, especially immediately around your homes. So we will come, we'll take it, we'll chip it, we'll bring it to the landfill where it is composted. So, it's a free resource, highly encourage that you participate and that you also get your neighbors to participate with you, because that's where we really see that amplification of our efforts is when communities are working together. We actually have our first 2 Firewise communities in our district ever, and that has happened within the last year. So we're seeing communities that want to become certified, designated Firewise. That's popping up more and more and more, and this is a great way to get that conversation started. Let's go next slide, perfect. At the landscape scale, we are doing, that's a really cool picture. I'm gonna stop and admire the picture. That's Sunnyside, the Sunnyside burn as seen from the gondola. So people are still skiing while the burn is going on. Anyways, so we're doing early detection. We have 4 cameras in our district that are AI cameras. They spin around every minute and they identify when they think that there could be smoke. They can distinguish from things like fog or changing trees or snow suddenly on the ground. And that information goes from those information centers to our firefighters. There are additional cameras like this that have been put in further down the valley as well. But Aspen Fire was the very first people in the state to try this technology, and it is like absolutely blowing up. There's like 60 plus cameras with like hundreds more going in. It's very exciting. So yeah, we want to know early detection so we can immediately know what the response size should be. We're doing prescribed fires like the one you saw. We're working with a bunch of different partners and stakeholders to do things like bark beetle treatments in these areas where we're seeing a lot of beetle activity. The graphs are really cool. It does show that activity decreasing as we do these treatments. We're in the 3rd-ish year of treatment at this point. And we're also doing strategic cross-boundary mitigation projects. And so by that, I mean We have looked at our landscape, we have seen areas where we have the most concern, whether that's around our evacuation routes, whether that is, in critical, wildfire pinch points, areas with higher wind, areas with more southern exposure. We've looked at all of these different elements and we've already done like fire breaks. You may have seen some kind of off of Willoughby Way as a critical fire corridor. But we are continuing this process with a lot of partners like the city, the county, SKICO, ACEs. We've got a lot of people coming to the table saying, hey, what can we do to help? We're putting together basically landscape prescriptions and then doing these fuels reduction projects in these high priority areas. And so right now we have about 25 on our list, and that's guided by our county's CWPP, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And we're doing everything we can to get those projects done, so that way what you're doing at your home is amplified by what we're doing at the landscape scale. Because if either of those two components are missing, we're not going to be very effective in our wildfire prevention. But when those two things come together, what you're doing around your home in terms of moving your firewood pile and covering your vents, paired with what we're doing at the landscape scale to reduce that fire intensity around our communities and also create safe spaces for our firefighters to defend our communities, that's when we see the real, the return on investment. And so I also, this is not a pitch, but that is being funded through the Aspen Wildfire Foundation. A lot of people don't know that that's something that exists. And so I do want to let you know that that is the way that our community has been figuring out how to come together to help us fund these big projects that the district doesn't have the funding to pay for. We've figured out a way to kind of figure out how to do it anyways, and it's through the Aspen Wildfire Foundation, which is about a year old at this point.
How was that funded?
It's like donations and family foundations, and we have gotten a handful of grants. But again, we're about a year old.
Private though.
Yeah, for the most part, it's just people saying, hey, I want to help, how can we help?
I have a question.
Yes.
Has there been collaboration between all of this technology that you guys are doing for this foundation and insurance, HOA insurance, or insurance companies offering insurance? Because I feel like that
That's the
amazing
missing
technology would make us more attractive and be a piece that would lower our costs. If, AI technology, that's amazing,
Right, and we have put that, not in front of every insurer, but we've put it in front of a few insurers who have said, at this point, it's not enough of a guarantee. It's still kind of that nebulous, we've done a knee-jerk reaction and we're trying to figure out what's gonna be meaningful. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I just want to say insurance companies have their own modeling they use.
Right.
And believe it or not, there's a bill that just went through the legislation on wildfire risk. And they have to provide the Division of Insurance in Colorado with the models they use, but it's not open to public requests. So
We're actually hosting an insurance summit in June.
Oh, cool.
And that is part of that conversation is we're willing to do whatever you guys want us to do, but you have to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
Because
What moves the needle?
Right, and it's been very difficult to get that information, right? We're doing all these proactive things. Do they make a difference or not? And if not, what will? What do you guys, and so that's why we're actually having and hosting that discussion, and we're trying to get insurance leaders from throughout the world and the country here to do that.
That'd be awesome.
Because we want to be a part of the solution, but we're not given any direction on specifically how to do that, except, one of the things we have done, does anyone know what our ISO rating is?
Do you know what an ISO rating
You
is
ever heard
generally?
So it's insurance services.
Yeah, insurance services office.
But they provide a rating on your fire department, and that helps to change or helps insurance companies make decisions based on your insurability and your rates. Our current ISO rating is a 4. That's the poorest rating in the valley. That was done about 5 years ago. We've made massive upgrades in our response capabilities in that time period, and we're targeting an ISO of 2, which would be very beneficial probably to all of the people in this room and the remainder of the community if we can make that happen. We're working our butts off to do it. That's again another one of those areas where we actually have some idea of what we're supposed to be doing, but we don't know. It's still somewhat non-transparent.
Yeah.
You know, so we're doing everything we can, and then even when you talk about the wildfire scale, right, the 0 to 100, that's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
So I want to thank our folks from the Aspen Fire Protection District. We're going to be hanging around, Pat, myself, and them for the next 15 minutes or so. So come up and ask specific questions of all of our specialties if you'd like. We're happy to chat with you individually. Thank you.
Hey, Mel.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
Good.
They have any questions you have, all you
Glad to see you.
We're still there.
because that's one thing. Finding out about that CHIP program, where if we put stuff down there, so we can have a date and stuff like that, I'll make sure that my neighbors know about it.
That's awesome. Hey there, what's your name? Neil. Allie. Yes. Nice meeting you. Nice to meet you. Please send me an email.
A couple of things. One, slide